Our second reading is from Romans chapter 8. The attitude that comes from selfishness leads to death, but the attitude that comes from the Spirit leads to life and peace. So the attitude that comes from selfishness is hostile to God. It doesn't submit to God's law because it can't. People who are self-centered aren't able to please God. But you aren't self-centered. Instead, you are in the Spirit, if, in fact, God's Spirit lives in you. If anyone doesn't have the Spirit of Christ, they don't belong to him. If Christ is in you, the Spirit is your life because of God's righteousness. But the body is dead because of sin. If the Spirit of the one who raised Jesus from the dead lives in you, the one who raised Christ from the dead will give life to your human bodies also, through his Spirit that lives in you. Hear what the Spirit is saying to the church. By the way, Caroline, thanks for adapting to our new moment of hymns and playing from your home. I started this sermon multiple times. I find it infinitely more difficult to figure out what to say. And I'm not sure if that's because, as I first thought, there aren't people in the room to give feedback, or if it is because I myself am sort of stressed and overwhelmed about all sorts of things. And it is hard to sort of clear my mind enough to focus on much, which seems odd, considering that there should be less to focus on right now. I saw a post, which, you know, if you're someone who follows memes at all, they are brilliant right now. There are good ones all the time. But I saw one this last week that said something along the lines of, I always thought that I didn't clean my house because I didn't have enough time, and it ends up it wasn't that. I feel like there is more going on with less going on. And I think that is, at least for me, a product of a normal pace of life that I've tried to maintain that is probably not healthy for us most of the time, and definitely not so right now. See, because for many of us, we are confined in ways we have never been before. We are stuck at home in ways that we have maybe never been before. But I think that we have an opportunity to understand Paul's words in ways that we probably would have struggled to understand before. See, I find Paul to be a difficult author and difficult text to preach from most of the time. But when have most of us ever been told that we can't, or at least shouldn't, do whatever we want when we want to do it? I mean, I have those conversations sometimes as people's physical health declines or is temporarily halted due to illness or age. And it is not easy. Ours is a culture of ready and immediate gratification put in a timeout. You can't get what you want right now. You can't go where you want right now. You can't see the people that you want right now. I think more so for us than almost anyone in human history struggle with that we do not get to do what we want when we want to do it. So Paul is an often hard to understand writer, but I think that this moment helps me understand what he was writing today in a new way. See, Paul can come across as him saying that the flesh is bad, and especially depending upon what translation of this passage you read, it appears on the surface to be a very negative viewpoint of our human bodies, saying that the flesh or our bodies are bad by nature, and that the only good part of us is the spirit or the part that we can't see or touch. And this is very frustrating to hear. It doesn't do much to help being a human in a real body with real problems. But I don't read Paul to say that the body or the physical world is bad, and that the spirit world is good, as if one is one and the other is the other. Because I believe that Jesus did not come to set some parts of us free and vanquish the rest. Jesus was interested in all of us. And it is just such a time as Lent and shelter-in-place orders that we might see more clearly that we are far less in control of our world and even our own bodies than we might have suspected. See, the physical presence we hold in our flesh grounds us in a world that is not ours to do whatever we want with it. Maybe that's a new reality for us. It is this suspicion of the ego that has the potential to reveal the breath of the Spirit that holds us all the time. And it is this sense of ego that I think Paul is talking about. But this spirit or breath of life, what we might call it, is not disinterested in our bodies. See, it's no accident that the word for spirit and for wind and for breath are used interchangeably throughout the Bible. It is, in fact, the very bodies of flesh that in turn hold this spirit, this breath of God. See, it's far too simple to relegate one realm of life as different from another, that the physical life is different from the spiritual life, as if they're not always in play. The question Paul is getting at is, are we able to see that our physical fulfillment, doing whatever I want to do all the time, an ego-driven existence, betrays the divine presence that holds our lives, whether we realize it or not? And I think that we are discovering, or are in the midst of discovering, what this means in ways that I would never have suspected, or maybe that I would have feared to suspect. See, I think that the church has rarely understood this reading as we do now, or as we are about to. I know, and you know, we must believe that the church remains whether we meet in this place right now or not. We profess that the church is something intangible, something separate from me, myself, or even us gathered, that it takes on a life that is beyond us. The church remains even beyond us. The church was here before our days, and it will remain after our days. It is something forever here and always beyond here. And we stand at a historical and powerful moment. See, I'm convinced that future generations will look at us and ask big, clumsy questions just like I ask and just like you have asked about generations before us. They'll ask what it means to be the church. And they will ask what we did when the physical act of gathering to be the church was halted, when the flesh of the church was relegated to the side. They will ask what it meant to be the church in 2020. The same way that I have asked what it meant to be the church during the plague that swept through Europe, what it meant to be the church in Nazi Germany and Europe during World War II, what it means to be the church all throughout the world in moments of isolation and moments of fear. Future generations will ask how the church could survive without the flesh gathered in a room. And they very well may say that this was a moment that the church remembered itself. We have this moment to tell the future church what it means to trust in the breath of the Spirit, to trust that that Spirit was the driving force all along, that the body gathered is not all there is. Hopefully they will appreciate what being in the body gathered together feels like. Hopefully they will appreciate what it means to welcome one another with familiar words of welcome and love, of handshakes and hugs, of hello. Hopefully they will appreciate the touch of Christ's peace when they say, "Peace be with you," and also with you. I hope they feel the same pressure in their chest that I feel when I think about the people I am missing being around me. I hope they remember through the memory of those who persevered what sacredness in one another means. I hope that they will never take the very flesh of our bodies for granted. But I am sure that we are going to be okay. It's funny how reading a passage changes as quickly as our perspective does. What on any other day, on any other month, in any other year would be a frustrating reading of Paul speaks to me in ways I did not predict. I started this sermon over and over again, multiple times. I think trying to avoid seeing it in a way that I didn't want to see it 5 months ago. What I believe is that God has always tried to remind me of what my life is for. God has always tried to remind us all of what our lives are for. Our lives are real flesh and bone, the physical memories of generations before us. But our lives are also something far beyond that. See, because our life does not ultimately belong to a virus. Our life does not belong to financial markets or a retirement account. Our life doesn't belong to Amazon, who would like to ship us all that we need at a moment's notice. Our life in Alaska doesn't belong to tourism or oil pipelines. Our lives as human beings, they do not belong to our mortgage and rent payments that we may not be able to pay next month. It doesn't even belong to the food and medicine we need to survive. See, our lives belong to something greater than that, not excluding all of those things, but something even bigger. Our lives belong to God and to each other. And it is this moment of physical separation that I think we have an opportunity to see that in ways that we would not have before. That our lives belong to something else beyond even the familiar and welcome touch and presence of those around us. Our lives belong to God and to one another. And unless we begin from that, everything else will be counted as pointless. See, in any other year, that would not feel like very good news. But strangely, it does today. that our lives are bigger than the real fear of our physical bodies, that we belong to something that perseveres and persists beyond the threats to our physical safety and our loneliness and our isolation. We are going to be okay. I am going to find a shadow in the sanctuary out of the sunlight. I promise we are going to be okay. We will persevere. And in doing so, we will teach future generations what being the church means. That it's not just gathering in this place, that it lives far beyond you and I, that it has a life of its own that we are blessed to join. It belongs to God in ways that we cannot define or control. But be reassured. Following into this Spirit, living into this presence of God, is even the way that we will reclaim our very physical bodies. This is the way that we will reclaim the common humanity that we share, the fears that we hold for one another, the restlessness. May we be reminded and look deeply within ourselves to see that the Spirit is working in ways that we may not have been able to see before. And we will be able to say that we are going to be okay. And in the real story of our lives, our physical beings, the future church will be able to look at us and say that they are going to be okay. May the Spirit be with you today and always. May you know that you are loved by a God who was here before you and will persist with you forevermore. Amen.